Well, today I'm going to try something a little different. And I'm starting early because I'm starting early so that if I try something different and it doesn't work, then we can still start on time. So if you're hitting this live stream, let folks know what I'm doing today is the first podcast episode recording on Noster. Do you know what Noster is? I know what Noster is. Noster is a protocol upon which a social network is built. Why is that cool? It's cool because that means you can look at it with a variety of different tools to interact with people. And if you maintain control of your public and private key, actually, private key being the most important part, um, no matter how the world changes from ways to look at your social interactions, you can always use a different window into it. And it's basically decentralizing social networking and talking to each other. So, over the weekend, I figured out how to live stream to my Noster account. So I've just announced to folks on Noster that we're going live to record the podcast today. And in order to do that, I have to take an extra step when we're live streaming. So because today's my first time doing it for my podcast, we went live last night on Noster just to have a roundtable discussion with Toolman Tim and Spags. Um, I decided to start this live stream early. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to give us about a 5-second delay. So I have a nice like flat line in my audio recording for the audio podcast. And then we're going to start the podcast. Ready for it? I'm ready for it. Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, September 16th, 2024, and this is episode 951 of Living Free in Tennessee, and it's a Monday show, so it's a topic I come up with, and today's was inspired. I've got a frog in my throat. Today's was inspired by a question from a new homesteader who is coming, like they're getting ready for winter, and they're smart because they're starting to get ready for winter now, and they realize that they have a very deep well, and sometimes in the winter it gets really cold, and sometimes when it gets really cold in the winter, well, the power goes out, and they realize, gosh, I'm not going to have water. So they asked what to do about that, and the first thing that came to their mind was a whole house generator, and that seems like a lot of money for them with a giant propane tank. So today I'm going to talk about maintaining your well through the winter from my perspective as a homesteader, because when I moved in here, we had my first experience with a well pump, first of all, and then I got to have all sorts of problems with it and learn everything the hard way. So what I've learned the hard way, I'll share with you today so you don't have to do it. I'm also going to cover all of our usual Monday segments, and I think I'm live on Noster. So folks over on Noster, if you have questions, I have you on another monitor, so I'll look over here from time to time for questions. Put the word question in all caps so that I know that you want me to talk to you. Anyway, with that, we're going to go to our featured event of today's show, and that's the Back to the Land Festival, the week of October 18th through 20, and it's in Centerville, Tennessee. And it's a really fun festival. I spoke at the first two of them. They're doing the fourth one now, and it's backtothelandfestival.com. If you decide you want to go to that, we're kind of doing a tradesy between SRF and Back to the Land. So they have a 15% off coupon code you can use. Use coupon code SRF when you buy your tickets, and you will get 15% off. They've got all sorts of cool speakers, including our own Don Gorham is going to be speaking about maintaining a family milk cow. They've got William Bond coming out to talk about soils and all sorts. He's like, just sitting with him is super cool to talk to him about starting your homestead, getting your soil ready, putting in food forests, anything permaculture, basically. You can talk to him about. He has real life experience, and he did train with Jeff Lawton. So if you're in the permaculture world, like, that's pretty darn cool. Anyway, that's all over at backtothelandfestival.com. I also want to thank our two sponsors of today's show. The first one is the KangenWaterCollective.com, which is a whole bunch of people using that big expensive machine I bought for water that makes me feel better. And it's a great place to, if you're like, how does this water work? Great place to go to check it out. go to kangenwatercollective.com. I brought them on as a sponsor today because we're talking about well systems. We're going to talk about water treatment partway through this episode. And I thought, well, the Kangen machine has changed how we treat water here. So that's a whole nother chapter that we will go into later in the show. Our second sponsor of today's show is agoristaxadvice.com. Matthew Sursley from agoristaxadvice.com is a cool dude who has a lot of information stored in his noggin. And one of the things he's particularly good at is analyzing how your financials work, how you've structured yourself as a business, and how you can potentially change how you structure and or take the opportunity to write off things that are expenses by documenting them properly and even knowing that they exist, which is a huge deal because there are things that exist that are not just like overt in the tax code. With those tools, he analyzes all of how you're structured, and then he suggests restructuring, talks to you about some maybe low-hanging fruit and other sort of tax write-offs you can take and any risks associated with them, as well as shows you how he would document them so that if anybody ever asks any questions, you're like, here's my documentation, right? That's all over at agoristaxadvice.com. He has a little scheduling link there. I believe he still does a free consult at this point, but that might go away because a lot of people have been reaching out to him. So check him out, agoristaxadvice.com. With that, we're into our first segment of today's show, which is listener feedback from Brian. Brian sent me an email and said, I wanted to let you know your episode resonated with me since I never know what to say on this subject. And this was my episode on what to say when you don't know what to say, like when somebody has a death in the family, which is one of those times everybody's like, oh, it's so cliche. I don't know what I say, right? We had a good discussion about that. Like, I think it was 2 weeks ago now. I never would. So anyway, I never. Oh, I will. No. Whenever we pass around condolences cards at work, most people will write "sorry for your loss." I prefer let the good memories get you through this tough time. I remember feeling exhausted after my mom's time on hospice. I hope you're getting some time to relax and reflect, especially with the traveling you were having to do to support your family. On the subject of heart, and this is cooking heart, right? I used one of my pig hearts in chili last year and I called it heartburn. The meat never got soft. It was firm, even after simmering overnight. Most of the kidneys I eat are from smaller animals, which turn out awesome when cooked in a roasting pan. Pig kidneys, deep fried while you are rendering the lard, is pretty good. Cubed up and lightly floured is good too. Take care and keep up the great shows. Okay, so let's talk about heart. I cooked a heart live. And what I did is I cross-cut into steaks and then flash cooked it to keep it rare. It was delicious. It was delicious. And when I did the heart research, because I haven't really cooked many hearts, it talked about low and slow to make it tender. And so apparently his low and slow didn't work. I tried low and slow here, but not for very long. And it was not the best the way I did it, with some of the leftovers of that heart. So that so I got 2 meals out of it. I did like the sear and then the leftover from the sear and the eggs in the morning on the scramble. And then I had some smaller chunks I was going to make into a stew that I ended up just cooking low and slow in a cast iron skillet. And they just never quite got to where I wanted them. So I'm going to do an actual experiment following an actual recipe of a roasted heart that's low and slow. If it ruins the heart, fine. And the only trick is I've got 2 hearts in my freezer, and I'm pretty sure one is a pig heart and one is a cow heart. I'm not sure they're labeled well enough for me to know that. So it could matter which kind of heart, but we'll just keep cooking hearts while I have hearts to find different ways to cook hearts, because it's a very underrated cut of meat. Like the other thing you can do is grind it and make it into sausage, right? But people don't talk about it a lot, and it sounds gross, but it's delicious and it's very lean. So there we go. Rachel is on saying, don't forget to slap that like on the way in. So if you want to slap that like, that would be great. And Rachel also says, so timely. We're getting rail installed on our property in about a month, and we aren't set on what size well house and what we want to do to keep it running. I'll have a lot to say, although a lot of my experience comes from moving into an existing system. And I actually ran my list by Tactical today in case he had anything to add. And he was starting to go down this road of installing, and like, we're not talking about installing right now. We're talking about maintaining. So we could do a whole show on how to design your water system, and that'd be kind of fun to have both him and Sean Mills on, because we've redesigned my system based on a whole lot of things, but mainly that my spring is at the bottom of the hill and my house is at the top of the hill, and that adds a whole nother level of complexity when you do not have your storage tank near your house or in an elevation that's above or close to the same level as your house. Okay, our live stream schedule this week is right now, and then Tuesday, which is tomorrow at 9:30, we'll be on with Alan Booker. That's right. We're going to be talking to Alan, and Sean Mills. We'll be talking about all things Alan. And then Friday at 9:30 a.m., Homestead Happenings with the Tactical Redneck. Now, if you don't know who Alan Booker is, by the way, I probably should tell you about him. He's a permaculture badass is what he is. And he did the session on how resilient is your kitchen if you joined our Learn from Legends webinar series this year. But he teaches the PDC at Paul Wheaton's, and he is in Alabama developing a community there, as well as a really deep thinker on topics of maintaining your genetics in your seed stock and all sorts of stuff. So like where that conversation is going, I don't know, but it's definitely going somewhere interesting. Okay. Time for our first segment of today's show, Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about storing what you use and using what you store. And all I can say is this: when you have construction in your house, things are not as easy to manage as they once were. And we've gotten to the point in the construction project that I'm working on before my mom comes here. She's going to be here in 2 weeks. I wanted to have a more accessible shower than my clawfoot tub. And so a friend of mine's been working on the bathroom, because I have not been working on the bathroom, and it's all tiled and it will be ready in time for her. But we are down to sanding some drywall. And if you've ever sanded drywall, you know it just puts dust everywhere. So I've now got the situation where my mudroom is in my living room, and then things that are supposed to be in my living room are in my office. At the same time, we redid the roof on the Prepper Pantry. So the Prepper Pantry stuff is out under my carport, and it's a little chaotic. It's a little chaotic. Like today, I was like, you know what we could do? We could use this one. I'm not going to be able to find that thing. So all I can say is, when you have construction, be ready for chaos, be prepared for chaos, and accept the chaos, and then move on. Other people are cooler than me, and they stay like way more organized through that. But holy cow, as part of this, Tracy helped me audit my freezers. We are down to 3 freezers. We'll be down to 2 freezers shortly. And at the same time, I've gone carnivore for a while. So I'm going to be doing carnivore for a while. And despite the fact I'm a ketogenic eater most of the time, so just like whole vegetables and meat, I eat probably more meat now, I would say, at the moment. And I'm surprised how much beef we went through this year. We've gone through 2 cows almost. I think we're going to finish 2 whole cows. And that's like Tactical and me, whoever comes over to eat, plus any events we've served beef at, that all came from those 2 cows. But I realized that just having half a cow next year probably isn't going to work for our storage. So this is why I have a number of hearts in the freezer, guys, is I keep all of the cow they will give me, all of it. And then when other people get cows, I get all of the parts I don't want. I have 2 tongues left to cook too, and I just cooked a tongue the other day. So there you go. I'm actually going through all the hard to cook parts. And by hard to cook, I mean a heart takes extra handling because you have to trim it and cut it and blah, blah, blah. A tongue takes extra handling because you have to pull like the outer skin off. And the ribs, the little short ribs, take more time because they're low and slow. And so anything like that right now before Self-Reliance Festival that takes time, I'm doing, because by the end of this week going into Self-Reliance Festival, I'm going to be like steak, sear, eat, steak, sear, eat, pre-cooked meatloaf, cook, eat. So that's all happening. Just knowing though how much meat we went through this last year, I was kind of impressed when I realized what happened. The fridge management on carnivore. So I'm going into my 2nd week of carnivore right now. And the way that went is Tactical is still eating vegetables until the vegetables are gone. and I had like a backlog of stuff from the garden. I told him today, I showed him like this beautiful tomato from the garden. I'm like, this is the saddest part of carnivores. I don't get to eat this tomato. And he said, maybe you could have one slice. And I'm like, I kind of feel like that undoes what I'm trying to accomplish with this particular time. So fridge management with carnivore has been really funny because usually I have a variety of things in there. And now it's just like the defrosting meat, the already cooked meat, and nothing else. Like you're not doing sauces, you're not doing anything else. So it, in some ways, that's a little bit easier to make sure you don't have like something lost in the back corner. And then this weekend, last weekend's goal from a pantry management standpoint was to take all of the tomatoes that are in the freezers out, make them into sauce, and can the sauce. And then the weekend happened and we moved the Rams, and that took pretty much all day Saturday. And I decided, because Sunday is usually the day I use to get ready for the week. And like I pre-roast coffee orders that need to be shipped Monday, like all of that. I decided not to get into the tomatoes, and I had a box of extra tomatoes that my friend had, so those went also into the freezer. And I've decided that we are going to can those tomatoes after Self-Reliance Festival, and there's no reason to rush it. So that's off my list. Once that's done, though, I have no more canning to do for the year, and we're good to go. And then the only thing we're doing from a collecting from the homestead standpoint is anything, any herbs or medicinals we want to dry from, like the passion flower or goldenrod or mint for tea, or the basil. I'll be freezing basil, then freeze drying basil. So lots like things of that nature we'll still be putting into the pantry. But, after 17 years of doing this, I've got it down to pretty well knowing what we need to store for the winter from the garden. And I have let the garden up the hill that we're moving down the hill. I've pretty much let it go. It's done. The only thing I need from up there going into the winter is that I'm going to plant garlic up there, and I'm going to transplant the lemon balm into different places around property, because there's a really nice lemon balm plant up there I got from Sean and Dawn Mills that has been a beast ever since I got it. Although the funny thing is they probably still have the lemon balm plant that they took that from. And so I'm pretty sure that I could get another cutting if I needed one, but I don't think I need one. It kind of grows like mint, so I'll probably put it in my food forest, because the kinds of plants I need in the food forest are things like that are very, very, very robust, that don't need a lot of like hand holding, because I just want them to take over and keep the other things out I don't want there. Next up, we have the weekly shopping report from Joe. These are likely to be a little more sporadic, he said, because he has now retired, which means he's not on the same weekly schedule with his wife. Anyway, he said, we skipped Home Depot this week, but the online price of a 2x4x8 has gone up 20 cents to $3.85. Aldi has neither the old or the new varieties of cat food, so we're dipping into our stockpile. We found everything else we wanted. Staple prices were as follows. Bread, $1.39. Eggs, $3.76. That's down from last week. Last week, egg prices were actually up quite a bit over the week before. Whole milk, $2.92. Heavy cream is holding strong at $5.39. OJ, $3.45. Butter, $3.99. Bacon, $3.99. Potatoes, $4.59. I feel like that should come down soon, because it is potato season right now. Like height of the season is about to start. Sugar, $2.99. Flour, $2.35. And 80% lean ground beef is $3.49. A gallon of untainted gasoline, which is ethanol free for my new viewers over on Noster, $3.59.9, and it's been at that price for months now. And we all love our ethanol-free gas. Next up, we have a frugality tip. I don't have one in right now. And Margot is somebody who sends us a lot of the frugality tips. And I actually wanted to take this moment to thank her for that, but also for something else you may not have noticed. If you follow me on social, and Nostrites, you'll eventually get subjected to some of these, but I haven't put them over there yet. If you follow me on social, you see some short videos that are just excerpted from shows like this that are, maybe a minute long. The way those are generated right now, because I was using Opus Pro to generate the clips and then sort of using them. But what happened was, with Opus Pro, I could get a high volume of shorts out, which on YouTube worked pretty well to drive, new people in. But what happened is I started getting just nonsense videos, and it was like, okay, I'm not sure it's worth getting a bunch of nonsense videos out there and then like you have to refine them to get them right. So Margot agreed to start sending us, like, I think a clip from somewhere right around here would be really good. And she's done better than that. She's like, this one to that one, this is a good clip. So she's been giving us three clips per show pretty much. And if you've seen the shorts lately, they've gone up in quality because of Margot. So I wanted to take a moment to thank her for that. Okay, next up is Operation Independence. This is where we talk about building local ongoing revenue into your life and learning skills when it makes sense to learn these skills to avoid the need to pay a guy. So you don't have to earn 30% more, pay taxes on it, pay the guy who's going to pay 30% taxes. And you see how that just like feeds the beast, right? Um, the concrete pour is this week. It is Thursday. It was going to be tomorrow, which was actually kind of a tight schedule for me, and it got rescheduled till Thursday, which is a day that I usually roast coffee. And it's sort of like the anchor day during the week where I don't have content to create. So I can do a lot of the clerical stuff, a lot of the pre planning for the next week, and that sort of thing. Well, that's not what my 1-3 thing on Thursday is, pour concrete. And the cool thing about this is I'm learning the initial learning part of how to oversee a pour. Now, I'm not overseeing the pour. Somebody else is overseeing the pour and telling me what to do. So by learning that, I mean I'm seeing how it's done. I've seen it done before while not helping. I'll actually be in there helping. And my goal with this is to be able to oversee other smaller concrete pours over time, because I realized we have a lot of concrete projects here. Some of them are just beyond the skill set I have, but some of them are like this one, which is a 13 by 20 foot or a 14 by 20 foot pad that a pool is going on. And with that, it's a fairly straightforward project. Tactical has done all the groundwork on like get overseeing the excavator to get it leveled out. There is gravel in there. There's a frame built. Nighthawk was over here working on the frame yesterday, so that's good to go. We're going to double check that it doesn't bow in so that we don't lose inches side to side, because the width is particularly important for the swim spa. And then we're pouring it, and that's going to be really cool. And I don't have to pay a professional concrete company. So I'm pretty sure the bid I would have had for that is roughly double what I will have spent. And this is one of those times where, despite the fact the majority of my income comes from sales of coffee at Hollow Roast, and oftentimes it does make sense, in fact, to pay a guy for me because I can earn more money doing the coffee and the content creation. Um, this one, that's not the math, just works out in my favor. It just works out in my favor. So I'm pretty stoked about it. And I'm stoked for a couple of reasons, even though I'm sure I'll be asking for help to oversee pours again. This opens up a faster timeline to get concrete around my house, which will reduce how much mud the dang dogs track in, for example, here. And it will set up more comfort at our spring workshop where people come to events. So that's just, it's just like a whole, like, it's one of those, sometimes you come to this roadblock that you always hit. And mine has been concrete related for years. And I'm like, okay, here we go. Concrete it is. I'm going to be learning about concrete. I was kind of joking with Tracy Eversole this morning, like maybe we should like legit learn concrete and do it professionally, because we might make more money doing that than anything else we've done if we feel like going out into the real world and doing concrete. There's a reason a lot of people don't do concrete though. And I'm pretty sure I'm about to find out how hard the work is. And that's probably the reason, but it's going to be fun. Anyway, with that, it's time for the main topic of today's show, which is maintaining your well through the winter. Now, when I get put on homesteading panels and people ask me, like, if I can't get the land yet, what should I do to be a better homesteader when I can be a homesteader? And there's lots of answers to that. But one of the answers I almost always give, beyond like start growing some plants so you know how to garden before you go in, even if it's in containers on a windowsill or something or on a balcony. The thing I would learn is plumbing and electric. And the reason I would learn those two things is there are countless times on the homestead where you need skills. Like, you don't need deep skills in those areas, although you kind of do if you have a well. But you need skills in those areas, and finding somebody who has time to come out that same day is super hard, and that's expensive. If you the faster you want them, the more it costs, right? So when you come to your homestead, if you understand some basics of plumbing, you're not paying a couple $100 to hook up a faucet in your bathroom because you realize you can do that in 20 minutes by just screwing some things in, right? So that's where I tell them, like, spend your time learning how to do that. If you have a friend doing a remodel who's doing plumbing, go give them a helping hand. But part of why I say that is when you have a well system, what you have is the joining of two trades, and one is electrical and the other one is plumbing. And the kind of person you need to hire to do that is somebody who can do electrical and plumbing. Yeah. So a lot of electricians won't touch plumbing, and a lot of plumbers won't touch electricity, and you need both. Or they'll do the one part but not the other part. So the skill set you need when you hire somebody to help you with your well system is a more advanced plumber. And you know what happens when you get a more advanced skill set, right? It's going to cost you more money. So then I was thinking about that, and then I was on the Homesteaders of Middle Tennessee group, and somebody has just moved into their homestead and they're smart. They know winter's coming. And even though it's only September, they're like, I need to think about what winter's going to be like here so I don't end up like Nicole Sauce was her first winter, where she was like putting buckets by the wood stove to melt the water and bringing the next water out to the animals and then switching it, right? I don't do that anymore. I would do that if I had to, but I don't have to do that because I've changed how systems are set up here. So they asked what to do about having a well system in the winter, because what happens in the winter sometimes is way out where they are, the power goes out, and the power is required to get the water from. They have a deep well, so I think it's like 250 feet deep, which is pretty deep. um, Goes way down there to get the water, brings it out. That requires a specially, like, it's not a singularly super powerful pump, but a decently powerful pump. Like, that is not something that is plugged into a 20 amp breaker. I'm sure it's on, in fact I know it's on a 220. So it takes some power. It's way down there. And if the power goes out, the water that's way down there cannot be hauled out with a bucket. And so they were like, so I've been looking into this and it looks like I need a whole house generator and a giant propane tank. And that's really expensive. Does anybody have better ideas? And I wrote, I'm just going to do a show on this on Monday because it's a really good question, but I'm not coming at it from the perspective of that specific situation. I'm coming at it from the perspective of anybody with a well. So you may have a shallow well like mine, which is a spring, but it's at the bottom of the hill, which is like 80 feet lower than I am. So I'm pumping up 80 feet to get to my house, right? They're going way high. They have to go way higher than that. And in some ways, the fact that mine comes up at the surface makes some things a little easier, but it makes some things a little bit harder too. So the first thing I would say is define your goal with getting through the winter with your well system. Is it to pump water like you always use water all the time, where when the electricity is on, and take long, luxurious showers and all of those things that you can do? Multiple loads of laundry, whatever it is, all those things use lots of water. Or is it just to have water? Because you can solve this problem and have your pump off for 5 days and still have water if you just store enough water. And so if you're looking at covering the basics, define that goal. And then I'm going to come at this from the perspective of having water. So the simple and cheap and easy option that you can do right now is get water started and get bottles to store it in. How you can practically get those for free around here from people who do things like drink the pre-mixed iced tea or soda in bottles, and get those and store enough water so you have 2 gallons per person per day for a week. And if you have livestock, think about that. And somebody says, I live in Africa. We have no water. Yeah, that's a different problem than keeping your well system going through the winter. Um, that's a whole different episode, and we should totally do that episode too. So that's easy. And if you're going to do that, what's great is if you can make a space for where you store it. The other thing you need to know is if you use milk jugs for storage, they wear out and eventually they leak and then they leak down on everything under it and you can cause a bigger problem. So if you're going to store in water, use like 2-liter soda bottles, use the Arizona iced tea gallon things, use the treetop bottles. Those sorts of things work really well. I actually use glass. Which if you're storing it somewhere where it might freeze, don't use glass. I don't store it where it's gonna freeze because I heat different without electricity as well. So I use glass bottles, and because we've done a lot of events here, I have access to half-gallon liquor bottles because when we're serving mixed drinks, we'll use the big bottles and then we save those and we clean them out and we use them for water storage. So that also adds some entertainment to my life because if I bring it with me to have access to my spring water, right? And sometimes you'll see me like with this half-gallon liquor bottle drink. It's not, and the people are like, Nicole, that's hardcore at 10 in the morning. I'm like, it's water, man, it's water. So you can store it in mason jars too. It's just mason jars are small and you have to buy the mason jars. So unless you have a whole bunch of extra ones, I wouldn't do, but I would totally use mason jars if that's what I had. You can also buy purpose built like 5-gallon water storage tanks if you want to. Like I used to drag one of those camping, and so when I first lived here, my first water storage was that 5-gallon thing stored in a dark place so it didn't grow algae. That was it. That's the other thing about water. If you're going to store water and light hits it, it grows algae. So the cool thing about water is it stays stable, right? In the bottle. Once it's clean and it's in a clean bottle and the lid's on and nothing can get in it, that is a frugality tip from Margot. Keep liquor bottles to store water. That's right. So anyway, there's lots of different ways you can store water in things you have or that you have ready access to, and it doesn't have to cost a lot. And just figure out how much water do you need to store for it to work for your family in case the power goes out. And at that point, you're going into your water conservation mode where maybe you're not taking a long bath with your bottles of water. You have to gug in there and heat on the wood stove. There's, it's spit bath time, it's brush your teeth, it's to the degree you need to wash your hands. I keep a basin with water on my wood stove for washing hands when we don't have power here, so it's warm water, and that's like literally all that water is for. And then I change it out every so often. So that's a way to do it. Another place you can store water for washing, so you don't have to get into your bottles, is you can put water in your bathtub and store it in your bathtub, and have a 2.5 or 3 gallon bucket in there, and then you can flush the toilet with the tub water, or you can use it for washing and then use the scrap washing water to flush the toilet. Like one of the cool things when I was traveling in Japan that I saw was that they had toilets with a hand washing thing behind the toilet. So you flushed and then it starts refilling the tank, right? And you're washing your hands and it's going into the tank. So you're using gray water that way. That's something that hasn't become prevalent in the US, but I always thought that was one of the coolest things. Not one of the, it was one of the coolest things in Japan, actually. It wasn't the coolest thing, but it was definitely one of the coolest things about just how they've figured out to use that resource because the water needs to run in there anyway. Rachel says, one of the things I've learned is if you're going to be without power and backup power, especially if it's older, make sure you have a check valve or foot valve. We will talk about that later for sure. Check valves are something I had no idea what they were when I moved in here. The other thing is then look around your land. If you have land, is there a pond? Is there a pool? Is there a creek? Is there a river you can walk to? Does somebody else have a well that you can hand pump up, right? Because if you have a deep well and you put in one of those hand pumps, right, that's not a just put in one of those hand pumps thing. Like that's a major undertaking that I wouldn't try to do before winter right now. You can get water. If you don't have a pond or a pool or any of those things, maybe it's time to think about rainwater collection because you have a roof. And when it rains on your roof, water runs off your roof. And when water runs off your roof, it goes away unless you collect it. So it's very possible to source free or cheap storage containers for water that works in a situation for watering livestock, for watering plants, and with some treatment for watering humans off your roof, which is kind of cool, right? That's low hanging fruit. As long as our friend over on Noster says, you don't live in Africa with no water. Okay, so if you don't live in Arizona and it hasn't rained at all, if you are taking this from a US context, the rainwater collection works. And even if you live in one of those places where it rarely rains, like it's like even more water collection and storage is a great idea if you can get that set. And things that you can use to collect water in would be an IBC tote works really well. Those 55-gallon food grade drums work really well. There's all sorts of ways you can collect water. In Tennessee, it rains a lot, so this one works great here. In fact, I have a 250-gallon IBC tote that's for my home water system, so we can pump up the hill, store it there, and then gravity feed the house so that it just makes everything easier on my well pump. And this weekend, with the help of Ryan Steva, the homestead consultant, we found a 550-gallon tank at a really, really good price. And that's going to get switched out for the 550-gallon tank. The IBC tote then is going to go down to the cabin for tactical. And I haven't talked to him yet about if he's filling it from the well system here or if he's going to roof collect with that. But those are all things that I'm sure we'll document as we do them. Rain collection is something you can get in before winter. And somebody in the comments said rain catchment in winter is a thing too. Yeah, it's a really good thing. And if you catch it in a way that it does not also freeze, then you have access to water as a backup that's not stored in your house that you can use for flushing toilets and all sorts of different things. So those are my simple and cheap options for just reaching the goal of when there's no power and your well isn't working, you still have water to get through that time. Because usually here the power is not out for 6 weeks in the winter, right? It's usually about a week if on the high side. Like there was a really bad ice storm here a few years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago in was it Monterey that got hit hard? I think it might have been Monterey, but I'm not sure. But like all of their power cables were like basically knocked down. That took a little longer for some people to get power, but the power company's working their butt off to get that stuff back up as fast as they can. That being said, in a world where resupply is becoming increasingly difficult right now, being prepared to work through longer power outages is not a bad idea. So now let's move on to this concept of a generator to run your well system because your well requires electricity, right? Well, we're not going to talk about ram pumps today. That's also a topic for a different show. But when I think about having a well system, the first question I heard when I heard that question, thought of when I heard that question was why power a whole house with a generator when you can just power the pump? Because it's a whole lot less money and a whole lot less effort to just unplug the pump from one system and plug it into a generator. And if your well pump is hardwired in, then you might have to get somebody to help if you don't have the skills to figure out how to have a switch where you're able to then wire in a generator. But you're going to need a whole lot less oomph and a whole lot less expensive generator to run that well alone without anything else than you are if you're trying to power your whole house, and that includes refrigerators and freezers and video games and whatever else you have, studio lights, like all of that stuff. It's a very different equation in that situation. And in fact, for many years here, my winter strategy was if it's going to get super cold, like below 10 degrees or 5 degrees Fahrenheit here, what I would do is just drain my whole house after making sure I had the bathtub full and other things, so I didn't have to worry about pipes freezing. And then I would blow out the well house, and then I would just suck it up. And then I didn't care if the power was on or off at that point because the water had already been turned off. And then when it was warmer again, I turned it back on. When I finally got to the point where I had the budget to, because I guess, guys, backstory, when I first moved in here, I didn't have money because I had just spent all my money on this place. And at the time, I was able to flush toilets, but my water system was really, 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 really broken down. And things were really full of sediment. So in order to take a bath, I had one sink where I had managed to get water working, and I would take pots and I would fill them, and then I would heat the pots, and then I would carry them to the bathtub and take a bath. So that first winter, the least of my worries was, do I have running water out of that one stupid faucet? It was more like, how do I not make it even worse by breaking it? So um when I was to the point where it's like, okay, I've got some money and we can actually power the water if we have power out for more than a couple days. What I did was look for a generator that had this, that was watt comparable with my pump. And so if you're looking at a 220, you need a generator that can do 220. You need to look at, how can I plug the generator in to the pump without backfeeding the power system on accident somehow. So just make sure that's all set up the way you need it to. And then you have water hours basically. You know, power goes out, you're like, okay, everybody's going to take their showers, or we're going to run water to do dishes, or whatever it is you want water for. You turn it on, pump the water you need, turn it off, and you're done. What we do here actually at this point is we do that. We make sure our freezers and fridges are cold, and then everybody does all their stuff, and then we turn it on. And then there's a second time later in the day where we have the second burst of water. And in that way, we are able to get through days without power and without water. Um, my first generator, I got a Honda, and it cost me $1,200. So it was a lot. I could have gotten a Harbor Freight one for with the same amount of power, for probably $400 to $600. And it may have been better, actually, in hindsight, to get two of those and keep them maintained rather than the one Honda. The reason I got the Honda was I could start it by pulling the cord, and it was high quality, recommended, all of those things. And I was tired of a world in which I had to start small gas engines, and they fought back with me all the time, because I've gone through a lot of lawnmower sagas and weed whacker sagas and chainsaw sagas. So I was like, I really just want a generator, if I'm going to spend the money, that just freaking works. And the key is this: what your pump draws on a regular basis is a lower number than what it needs to start. So you need to find out what it draws to start its initial rotation, and make sure your generator can handle that. And if you're like feeling out of your element on this, talk to somebody like Sean from Hack My Homestead, or somebody else who's gone through this, or find a friend with a generator that you think's the right size and borrow those and see if it works. Because once you commit to a generator, you're also committing to using the generator. You don't just set the generator in your garage for 5 years until you need it, because it probably won't start. You're supposed to start them once a month. I don't. I might get to it once a quarter, but I get it started, and then you want to pull a load on it. So like, I'll start mine and plug a deep freezer in it or something, so that it's pushing out power. So that's the generator. But that's actually not your only solution. We talked about stored water. If you collect rainwater into an IBC tote, and that's now on the level of your house rather than deep in your well, and top it off with your well if you know some stuff's coming, if it's not full from the rain, you can get a 12-volt pump, because it's not pumping up a hill, and pressurize your system with that. You end up plugging it into your hose spigot, turning off the valve to your actual well, and it will pressurize your system, and you can use water from that in your system as normal. But you got to do it in conservation mode, right? And I don't know how long it would, or how large of a battery you'd need for that, but you can also charge that battery with a not so powerful generator. So probably less expensive is figure out how to store the water and have a smaller 12-volt system that can run things. Learn how to backfeed into your system, the water I'm talking about, not the power, and be able to run off batteries, or be able to run off a small generator. For you can do a 110 or a 12-volt pump depending on how you have it set up. Like, this is like the camper model of doing it, right? Like, I have a camper with, I actually just converted from 12-volt to 110 because I have a solar system installed in the camper, and it actually runs at, it has an inverter that translates everything to 110. So it didn't make sense to have the only thing 12-volt in that camper was the water pump. But it's a not very powerful pump, and that works great. And in fact, if you have a camper, then there's your water for the winter if you can keep it from freezing. And then I guess on this topic is, have you done a power audit of your home? It's kind of related, but kind of not related. Like what in your home exists that is a point of weakness from a power grid situation? So for me, that would be like, is my heat electric only? Well, mine isn't. Mine's wood only. Like I have some space heaters I can use if I have the flu, but basically I have a wood stove and it doesn't require electricity at all. And that wood stove also heats water. It can cook food, and it makes me happy in the winter to see the fire. So it's just all around cozy. Well, because of that, I don't need to worry about if the power goes out in the winter because I can heat the house. It's actually more uncomfortable in the summer because I can't cool the house without electricity. So then I have to drag my butt down to the creek and sit in the creek, right? If I get too hot. My house is well insulated and built into the side of a hill, so it doesn't get super hot, but it can get super hot. Like if we were having day after day after day of 110 degrees Fahrenheit here, my house would get hot no matter what because it just will get hot. So, doing that audit, going into winter is really helpful because then you can make decisions about what you use to keep your well system going when the power goes out, and have it fit into the long-term plan so you're not buying things that you're going to use one winter and then never use again. So that's my thoughts on generators. I'm sure if we had Sean Mills on, he'd have a whole bunch of other thoughts on generators. But I also know that he moved into an off-grid property with a deep well, put in a solar system, and moved most of his water off of rainwater collection from the well. So his well is only there if their rainwater collection for the year gets down so low that they have to refill it from the well. Because he realized that well was using so much power to bring that water up from so deep in the ground that, especially with the climate in Tennessee and the rainwater coming, it made more sense just to put a bunch of tanks up near the house and use a tiny little pump in the house to have pressure in the house, and then just not even use the well pump unless you had to. So then let's go into winter well maintenance considerations. And this is a list of things I've learned about, lessons learned the hard way, and realize I moved into a situation not knowing anything about well pumps. I had done the kind of plumbing you do when you replace a faucet. Like I was not an advanced plumber. I had done a decent amount of wiring because I had rewired houses. So 110 circuits, that sort of thing. But I'd never, like, I had put one breaker in my life. And I've only put like 3 breakers in my life, to be completely transparent. I know how to do it. I don't love doing that because it's like I'm always thinking about, what if I get shocked? And I don't like being shocked. I can tell you that from having electric fences here as well. So the maintenance considerations, this is just a list to go through before you're in a situation so that if this winter it gets snowy, it gets icy, the power is out, and you've got to deal with this, you've already thought about it. You already have things on hand that you're going to want to have on hand. The first consideration is this, and this is fairly specific to places in the world where in the winter we haven't built our stuff to actually make it through the winter. And Tennessee is a great place for that. So we don't bury our pipes deep enough necessarily for every single winter. And when builders build homes here, they don't always build a home that can go to -5 Fahrenheit without the pipes freezing. So they'll put pipes on outside walls, they'll put them under houses, there'll be like leaks under, there's like different places where your pipes might freeze. So what ends up happening is you need to make a decision if you are one of those houses that freezes. And the way I found out I was one of those houses that freezes is I just froze. And then I was like, oh, it turns out the water pipes I thought went under the house go in the attic. And now I have frozen pipes in my attic, which if they thaw and the pump is still on, I'm going to have rainwater coming through my ceiling and ruin everything. So I had to deal with that situation while it was freaking cold outside so that I did not have a disaster. Had I known that or realized that before the winter, I wouldn't have had to do that. So I'm saying it now. Are you going to need to drip your water to keep things from freezing? What I discovered that first winter is if it gets below 21 degrees, I need to have the water moving through the pipes, which means it's not sitting there long enough to turn into ice, which means we don't get a frozen plug. Over the years, I have done a lot of plumbing projects here. And in fact, most of my plumbing is back under the floor because we replaced all the joists this year. And there's only one place in the house now where it still goes through the attic. And we have a shutoff valve and a drain like a spigot that we can drain water out from up there, so that in the winter time I could just turn that off and I don't have to worry about it. But for many, many years, I had to drip my pipes. And in fact, I still don't trust it. And if it's going down below 10 degrees, I have a tendency to drip my pipes because I'd rather run a little bit of water than completely freeze my house. And yes, I said make that choice. Are you going to drip water in your house or are you going to drain your house? My next door neighbor drains his whole house if it's going to go below 10 degrees. And that doesn't sound very fun, but you did just move to the country. And country living can be a little different than city living. Just make sure as you assess your plumbing system that you've thought about where is this going, where are the sensitive points. It doesn't make sense to put a valve and a drain here and just isolate this one bath. Like some people have this one bathroom in the back corner of the house that's just going to freeze, but you have two other bathrooms in the house, or you have another bathroom in the house. Just cut that bathroom off for the cold time, have a drain so water's not up in there, and you don't have a problem. You just have a little bit of inconvenience. So that's one thing about winter well maintenance. And I know that doesn't sound like it, but it kind of is because when you're dripping, your well has to work, right? Okay. The second thing is what keeps pipes and other essential well equipment at your wellhead? So wherever your pump house is, and what do you do if what do you do to keep it from freezing? And then if you have to do something to keep it from freezing, what do you do to keep it from freezing if the power goes out and power is part of your equation for that? Because if you don't keep it from freezing when the power's out at the wellhead, things break that you don't want to break. And the things in that pump house are the expensive parts of your system. So you, for example, if you have a pump that's up in your pump house and it just has a long pipe that's down in that well, then you would have a situation where if that pump freezes, it could split and then you have to buy a whole new pump. And that could be $1,000, right? That could be $1,500. That could be $400. It depends on what your pump is. If your pump is down a pipe in the well itself and going out, which most are, I believe, that are deep wells, it's a submersible. Then if that pipe freezes, your pump could keep working in a weird way and cause problems. Usually you have a pressure bladder, a pressure switch, and other equipment up in the pump house. And those things, if they freeze in the wrong way, can break. And then you're spending $500 here, $300 there. Like it starts adding up really quickly. So what I would do first year on a homestead, if I have a well system, is really, really hone in on the pump house and figure out what did they do to keep it from freezing. What most people do here is they just have a lamp on, like a heat lamp. That's a fire hazard. I've never burned anything down with one, but I just want to mention it can be a fire hazard if it falls or sparks or whatever on that system to keep them from freezing. And then people who have that kind of a setup, turn it on, turn it off, or plug it in, unplug it. I had one for years that was on a switch that sensed if it went down below 36 degrees and then it turned the light on, right? Some people use space heaters. Some people will use heat tape wrapped on the pipe. Those are all ways to do that. But if they're all of those ways use power. So what happens if you don't have power? Well, you got to have a backup system. A very easy backup system that I used for many years was a kerosene heater. I used one of those like round I have a big pump house. I used a round kerosene heater and just popped that puppy up at night when it was going to get down below whenever, and it would keep it warm. And in fact, most of the time I did that instead of using any power system at all. I put a rocket mass heater in my pump house so I could just heat the mass and it could continue to radiate heat into the pump house so nothing froze. Have I frozen my pump house? Once or twice I've frozen pipes in there. I also took out almost all of the PVC in there and replaced it with PEX, which expands when it freezes so that I wouldn't have the issue of a blocked pipe. Now, what about sediment in your water? If you have sediment in your water, all of the things you do about freezing can be more difficult because if the water flow slows down, that can be an issue. If you have a filter for sediment, that can freeze. So I'm pointing out that your water treatment system also needs to be paid attention to if it's somewhere where it can freeze. The next thing I do is document the components and understand what they're all for in your well system. So learn what kind of pump you have if you can. And if you have a model number and how many horsepower it is and the type of pump, like find out where you'd order another one and how long it would take to do that and how much it is, right? Because when you learn how the system works, you know how to troubleshoot problems. And the reason you want to be able to troubleshoot problems is that getting a well pump person the same day isn't always possible, especially when everybody's well pumps are freezing on the same day, right? Learn what a check valve is and where it should be. A check valve allows water to go one way, but not the other way. So when you're pumping up elevation, it goes up but doesn't come back down, and it doesn't put extra pressure on the equipment that's pumping it up the hill. There are multiple check valves all over my house, and in fact, I think I have one that's bad right now because I've been getting air in the line, because I think what's happening is water is going up and back and up and back. So that's something I've noticed is they don't make check valves like they used to, and I go through them from time to time. Now, knowing that I go through them, and the reason you want to document your components and know how to get them is I also know which components I should have more than one of on hand. For example, I have a pressure switch that does two things. Pressurizes my system and maintains it, right, at like 60 psi. And if for whatever the reason the pressure drops, which usually means that the level in my storage tank has gone too low, it turns the well pump off, which makes me have no water at all. But it does one thing that's very important. And that thing is that my pump doesn't keep running with no water, burn up, and break. Part of why I said find out how much it is to replace your pump is having that switch, I think, cost me $75 or $100. And when I asked for that switch at the plumbing store, they looked at me and tried to talk me out of it because it was a waste of my money. And it was like, why would you spend $100 on that? Well, because I don't want to spend $1,000 or $1,200 on my pump. And if you have a $5,000 pump, like you really want that. It's going to be a different kind of thing that protects your pump in that situation. But the thing you really don't want to have happen is that your pump burns up. And, in the winter, if things freeze, the situation could be set up that your pump burns up. And you just like, there's different ways to do it. But definitely look for something in your system that is protecting it, because it's kind of like having that EMP shield installed in your house, right? That's keeping you safe from lightning surges coming into your house and like blowing out all your appliances. And if it fails, you have an insurance policy. Unfortunately, with that switch, if it fails, you don't. But every time my water goes out, I would say in the last year, the water's been out probably at least 10 times, I'm going to guess. And that I know of. It might be more because Tactical sometimes notices it first, and he goes down there. You go look. Is there a problem? Is there not a problem? If there's a problem, like the tank is low, we refill the tank, and then I switch the switch, and then I have water again, and my well pump does not need to be replaced. Right? Every time that happens, I'm like, yep, that $75 switch was totally worth every penny. One time I spent $125 on one because I needed it same day. That switch sometimes goes bad, and that is one of the parts that I like to have doubles of. So just think, like right now I have 2 well pumps. I have 3. So I have backup pumps, and it's because my pump went on sale, and I was like, well, I'm going to buy another one because it dropped to $280 because they were like clearing it out. And I was like, well, for $280, I have another pump that can just be like, boop, 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 done. So I wouldn't necessarily say you need 2 pumps on hand. And the way my system is going to be different than a deep well system, but it doesn't hurt to have that. Okay, so let's talk about your water. Water that's coming from a well should be tested so you know what's in it, so you know how to treat it. And there's a lot of scuttlebutt back and forth about treated water. I do not add chlorine to my water to sterilize it. And I have some issues that chlorine would deal with. When I first moved in, I had it tested. There's a standard water test you can do, usually through your extension office. And I went down there and I'm like, but I want to know if there's heavy metals in my water. And they're like, why would you want to know that? I'm like, I don't know, cancer. And so at the time, TTU had a lab that tested for heavy metals. And so I had it tested for that, and I don't have heavy metals. And I just wanted to know, like, long term, if I consume this water, is there a problem? Or do I need to filter it differently? What ended up happening is I found out that there are organisms in my water that have to be controlled for. And then I was like, well, how can I deal with this without chlorine? And what I discovered was the Berkey water filter, which is a big controversial thing, but I've been using a Berkey water filter for damn near 17 years and it's worked the whole time. I've been pretty careful about where I source my filters and that they are actually Berkey filters, but it's worked the whole time. However, now I have a Kangen water system. And so what's happening is I do Kangen water, I get it from the machine, and then I pour it through the Berkey, and then I drink the water because the Kangen machine does not filter out microorganisms like that. What is happening as part of the construction project we're working on right now is I'm now going to add a built-in filtration system because another way to deal with them is to UV zap the water with UV, and then you don't get those organisms in your water. Once I have that system in, I'm taking the water back to the extension office and make sure the UV system really works before I drink the water because getting sick from your water sucks. The other thing I could do though, guys, is just boil my water. For a year, I just boiled my water. That's what I did because I hadn't figured out the Berkey, and then the Berkey was expensive at the time for me. And I waited another year boiling the water until one day I was like, I'm sick of boiling my water. And then I got the filter, and it's worked great ever since. So that's your water testing and treatment. The thing about going down that road is there are a lot of people with a lot of opinions about water, and you're going to have to make your decision the best because you could put in reverse osmosis. And my biggest problem with my water is that I have suspended clay, and I have not found a good way to get suspended clay out of my water that works really well. But I haven't installed a gravity fed sand system, for example, which would probably work. I don't know. There's a guy who shops at the pool store where my swim spot's coming from, and he uses a pool sand filter to get suspended clay out of his water, and then he buys all of his supplies like every quarter. And they couldn't remember his name when I was there, and I'm like, when he comes in, like I 100% want to talk to this person because I've tried a number of things and it improves it, and the clay is not hurting me, right? But the clay will rip apart a dishwasher over time. Like I have a water softener that helps with that, but then the water softener gets all gugged up and it's just not awesome. And I have multiple filters on that we're changing all the time. So I feel like there's got to be a better way for that. Um, Likewise, you may find out there's fluoride in your water, and if you're worried about that, it's naturally occurring fluoride. And my own decision I've made for myself is that the little bit of fluoride that's in my water that's naturally occurring, I'm just not worried about. And then something I didn't realize when I moved here that I should have known is that my local plumbing store is a gem. The guys who work, so it's like a small hometown plumbing and electric supply store, and the people who work there have been electricians or plumbers or both. So every time I've had a problem with my well system, and this is mostly how I've learned because I would go online and try to learn about it, and it was very difficult to find information. That's the issue, right? I go down to the plumbing store and show them all the pictures of my system, and the first time I had something go wrong, they're like, "This is the part you need. Don't take anything apart. Put it back exactly the way it was." And I was like, "Okay, but is it built right?" And they're like, "No. But if you start taking anything apart, everything is going to be a problem for you. So what you should do is just fix it for now and get it working and then worry about that long term." And I'm still worrying about it long term. I'm still working on it. But those guys know so much about well systems. And in particular, there's one guy there where I have a jet pump. So I have a deep water like submersible, but I also have a jet pump. And I'm currently right now working on the jet. I have like a two pumps I can switch to. The jet pump, almost nobody knows how to maintain those or use those now. He does. He does. And he knows all of the pitfalls and all of the good things about him. And a jet pump is less expensive, by the way, than a deep, like a submersible. And they do a fine job. And a lot of people just use them for irrigation, but I apparently use it for my house because I always had a jet pump here. So because of that, and because I've gotten to know them over the years, and I bought a lot of supplies there as we work on projects, that knowledge has been just a godsend for me along the way. So if you have one of those in your town and it's a little bit more expensive to buy supplies from there, go there anyway. Buy supplies from there because those guys are taking the time to teach you what's really going on. And they also know who you should hire. So then you can start that local network that you need to maintain your system so you don't have to call in somebody from 50 miles away, right? Like maybe there's somebody nearby that just kind of knows how to do this. They're like, well, call Jim and Jim will come out and he'll hook you up and you'll be good to go. All in all, I think what you do in year one depends on your budget and priorities. But I find going into winter and worrying about the winter power outages isn't what is the problem, right? Um, sure, the power goes out and you don't have water for a couple days, and that's a pain in the neck. Usually, though, what causes my pump to stop working is something else with the system breaking. So, if you can invest the time now to learn how your system works, then you can remedy things quickly rather than waiting days for a quote unquote professional to come in because that plumbing and electrical mix can't always drop everything and show up to your house in the middle of an ice storm and deal with it way out in the country. All plumbers are not created equal. Margot says, related to my filter, it's called a sediment filter. Yes, I have 4 sediment filters and it's not enough. That's the issue. I have spin down filters. I have whole house sediment filters and the suspended clay still gets through. So there's something else going on there. Anyway, I have really weird clay. So anyway, what all I'm saying is it's time to man up and learn if you're in that situation. And it's not going to hurt you to know more about how well systems work. And it may seem hard at first, but it actually gets really clear over time. And then you become a well system badass. Welcome to the country. If you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in 2 ways. Get your coffee at hollowroast.com or consider becoming a member. Head over to livingfreeintennessee.com to find out more. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.